Are we ready to go back online with Eric?
I took it out of the wall.
It's all right, thank you.
I disconnected it all.
Mr. Curtis? You ready?
You ready?
You're up.
Cool. First of all, I want to say thank you to Mr. Van Orman for getting back to me because I didn't know where to send it. So, at the last board meeting, Ms. Madigan said that I needed to fill out a form to speak to you guys and stuff that's not on the agenda. So, and that form is 1551. Just so the public knows, this form needs to be filled out in order to access the board on issues that's not on the agenda. I want to say that. I'm glad to see that you have acknowledged the citizen participation request form 1551 needs some revisions. According to the board agenda tonight, E8, asking the community to fill out the form 1 week prior to the board meeting seems a little unreasonable. Under what policy will this fall under? If the board is going to make the community member jump through these hoops to speak at the board meeting, can you please create a document that can be edited and able to send back to the board clerk electronically? A link. Right now it's in an email. So, right now the document is very confusing, cumbersome. Can it be made a little bit more user-friendly? Can these revisions be made before you vote on it tonight? I know it's in your board packet, but think about the community and how you access your form. If this is what you want, right now it's an email. Still a little hard. Make it a link if you could. Since the policy, I would like to know, since the policy has been in effect, how many community members have actually filled it out to speak? Is this board trying to make it so the community won't come in and talk to you as a group and not just one-on-one? Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mr. Curtis. Are any of the copies out there? No, they're not yet, right? The old copy?
Yeah, the old ones.
Okay, perfect. Okay, did you want to do the high school next, or Mr.
Before the presentations, I just wanted to draw everybody's attention to Mike DePerna. Mike came here tonight. Mike is from CNS, which at the last board meeting we approved CNS as our construction management firm for our upcoming or ongoing capital project. So in conversations with the district, Mike had asked if he could just come out and just give a brief hello and, you know, a quick face-to-face with everybody. So I'll turn it over to Mike for a second.
Well, first and foremost, thank you on behalf of CNS Companies for having us be your construction manager. We're excited about the opportunity. I will be your project executive throughout the entire project, which my role is to support the construction management team, work closely with the project team, Mr. Van Orman's team and King & King's team. We've already hit the ground running. I've been talking with King & King a lot about some things as they're preparing to submit phase 1 to SED. So again, excited, and we will provide weekly updates throughout the project to Mr. Van Orman, and then through that he'll be able to give you updates, and we will come and present at the board anytime needed on updates. You'll get a chance in the future to meet our project manager, Ross Lawton, who will definitely keep you updated on everything concerning the capital project. So again, thank you for the opportunity. We're excited about it.
Nice to meet you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thanks so much.
Have a good night.
You too.
You as well.
Okay, we do have 2 presentations this evening. The first presentation, just a slight change up in the order. I would ask that Ms. Bybee lead us off this evening. So Ms. Bybee is one of our coaches this year, of course, and her role with us in terms of coaching this year has been focused around our MTSS system. So Ms. Bybee is here this evening to give you an in-depth look at what that entails and some of the work that has been ongoing this year. I will turn it over to Ms. Bybee.
Thank you. Hi,
time and your attention. I appreciate it. So, MTSS stands for Multi-Tiered Systems of Support, which you may or may not know, but my mentor would be sad with me if I didn't go over the fundamentals every time I got a chance to. So it's just a framework kind of to organize supports for students to make sure that we're helping all students reach their fullest potential. Obviously, you need to have an eye on data in order to do that well. And we're looking at the whole child because when we can't just focus on academics, there are underlying supports that make a person academically successful. Things like their social emotional learning, behavior, and their attendance at school. So if you look at this triangle, it basically explains the tiered continuum of supports. Tier 1 is that base of the triangle. It's what we offer to all students in the areas of academics and behavior, and also we would consider attendance information as well. The hope is that Tier 1 instruction will help 80% of the students be successful academically and behaviorally. And then for those students who are not showing success in those areas, then we would give them a second layer of support. So we don't take away Tier 1 ever, we layer on those supports. And then if a student is still not successful after that Tier 2 instruction, which would be small group, more targeted, extra practice, maybe a different approach, then we would get to Tier 3, which is the most individualized, personalized opportunity for kids to get exactly what they need. It doesn't necessarily mean it's a one-on-one group. It does not mean that they are classified for special education services. These are accessible to all students as they need them. Okay, so we've been working really hard this year to get our teams up and running across the district. That's been a big goal. We've had teams in the past, but we're making sure now that we're meeting regularly, that we're looking at the composition of our teams, and that we have a structure and a format to those meetings to make sure that we're efficiently looking at how students are doing and how we're responding to that information. So we have Tier 1 teams that look at big picture data and decide what is working in our building and what do we need to adjust or address. Grade levels will be meeting regularly. Right now, it's not that every single grade level has set meeting times or meeting formats, so that's kind of some future work, but that is typically a Tier 1 practice. Tier 2, 3 we combine because we're such a small district and we don't have as many staff members to draw from. So we look at data in those team meetings weekly. We're looking at individual student referrals. We're looking at the data that Tier 1 also looks at, except we're pulling out those students who are struggling in academics, attendance, and behavior, and we're making a plan for what do we do for those kids. And we take a team problem-solving approach. That's at the heart of MTSS. We have a district level team that meets monthly, and those are all of the tiered coaches, the building administrators, Mrs. Vinny, Mr. Norman, everybody is invited, and that is just to make sure that we are using some consistency across our buildings and across our tiers, and bringing our good ideas and what's working really well to share those district-wide. Then we have instructional council that we're doing that just as a complement to our MTSS systems, where we're looking at data and concerns with the administration and the instructional coaches to kind of guide our work. So we have so many great offerings in Red Creek. We have lots of people doing lots of wonderful things for kids, but it can feel really scattered. So really the whole concept of MTSS is that we would organize it in tiers and then what we would call lanes of MTSS. So like this is for students struggling with attendance, This is for students struggling with behavior. This is for students struggling academically. And we would align those so that we're making sure that we're layering those offerings for kids. Let me just check my notes and make sure I didn't miss something. Okay, so we review Panorama data regularly, so this is a program that we have. It's a data warehouse that feeds in information from School Tool, from our screening programs, so that all of that information for a student is in one place, and all of that information for a building is in one place. It makes it easily accessible for our teams to pull up that information and get on the spot. How are things going? Everything refreshes every 24 hours, so that's been a really great addition to our processes. Future work for this is just to make sure that we kind of preset. This is our game plan if a student is, say, struggling with their attendance. This would be an intervention we would put into place. This would be the person or the people who would be available to do that. So right now, I feel like we're a little more reactive than I would like to be. So our future work is just being more proactive, having those things kind of set. This is our system and our protocol for reviewing our information, and when we are having a problem or a flag, then we do this. So I just wanted to take a minute to share some celebrations from the year and then kind of share with you what we see as future work for MTSS in our district. So I also want to highlight that as you've been hearing celebrations from buildings, there's going to probably be some overlap in what you're hearing from building administrators and me, and part of that just means things are going well and things are working well because we should be celebrating and working on the same things. We're steering the ship in the same direction. So Kyler, again, we're running academic meetings every 6 weeks. All kids are getting an ELA group and a math group with a targeted goal and a plan, and that information is the student progress is being tracked. Tier 1, we're doing character education focus every month and having Rams assemblies to celebrate positive behavior. In the middle school, we implemented a one-on-one data review with students, with a trusted adult and goal setting. The building rolled out PBIS rewards, which is just a way to acknowledge students who are doing good things in a more visible and organized way. So instead of just like, hey, great job, you can actually log into PBIS rewards and be like, who have I not acknowledged recently? I want to make sure I'm not leaving anybody out. So that's a good tool for teachers and students. And then the Tier 1 team is using Panorama every week to give shout outs to grade levels who have the best attendance, who have the most improvement in academics, and who have the fewest behavior referrals. And then they have a themed tracking system on the wall. So last month was a garden, and once a grade level filled their garden with flowers, then they planned a celebration. So I know one was like a swimming opportunity at the community center and open gym. So kind of those things just to reinforce the good things that kids are doing. In the high school, we did our first SEL screening, social emotional learning screening in the winter, and we worked through the process of what do we do with this information and how do we get kids into groups. So we've tapped into community schools, into Delphi Rise, into Optimal Health. So we've found lots of resources to kind of help get kids into groups where they're talking about things that are maybe on their minds, or goal setting, or talking about self-esteem and what that looks like. And then we are more regular communication via Panorama. Oh, right. Okay, so we are using Panorama. There's a note keeping system in there. So if we have a student in a meeting, we can keep a note of like, hey, I called a family this day, or this student attended their SEL group today. So we can see And anybody who works with that student can see, oh, this student has an intervention plan, or this student, you know, has gotten a phone call home from school this many times this year. And then we have much more diverse teams this year. We've got more teachers participating, more related service providers participating, and we're planning responsively and proactively. It's a lot to manage for the tiered coaches and for me and for Mrs. DeFeo who's helping out, but we've done a lot of work. We've built a really great team, and I'm excited about what all we've accomplished and where we are headed to. We also have a district-wide behavior matrix. Just this is what it looks like to be respectful in a classroom. This is what it looks like to be respectful when you're using the restroom or in the cafeteria or on the bus. Just reinforcing those RAMS expectations. So we have lots of things that we're planning to do. We want to have a more formalized rollout of that matrix next year for both the staff and the students, and we want to make it a fun and exciting event. So that is something we're going to be planning over the summer. We are finishing our tiered fidelity inventory. So you kind of do a survey of how you're doing at each tier in each building and then make an action plan. So those are all in process, and they'll be formalized in writing with a game plan and dates and who's going to be responsible for each of our actions. We're doing some panorama professional development right now to make sure that all teachers know what they can access and how to use it. And then just pre-mapping some things out. So I started my job late in August, and had lots and lots of training, so kind of all the pre-work that a type A person like me would like to have in place before the year started was not where I wanted it to be, so I'm excited to be able to do a little pre-planning, and then building a resource map like I talked about, so we know, like, hey, if a student is struggling with their behavior, this is what we're gonna do. Once a kid has this many referrals, we're gonna start with this, and here are some people who can provide a check-in, check-out intervention. And then just wanting to build in more student voice and family and community participation. So we'll be sending out a survey to get ideas for what we could be doing to make Red Creek an even better place for kids to learn. And then just need to shout out to the tiered coaches in each building because they do a lot of work. They run the meetings and respond to all of my requests and ideas. We've been attending the regional MTSS roundtable a few times this year, which is hosted at BOCES, and MTSS teams from across the region come together for professional development and some work time together, so that's been a great piece. And then Kristen DeFeo is our BOCES MTSS touchstone person, and she coordinates the MTSS roundtable, and she's here throughout the week attending meetings and giving me feedback for best practice. And then we have a check-in, check-out coordinator who's been doing a lot of work with kids in Kyler in particular. And then the admin team who has been very cooperative and great to work with when we sit down together. We've all got great ideas and kind of divvy up the work, so it's been great. So with that, just thank you for your dedication to excellence in Red Creek. I know that that's why I'm doing this job, and I'm sure that's why you're spending these evenings here too. So thank you for your time and your dedication.
Any questions for Mrs. Bybee?
The tiered structure notes the percentages for each tier, but those are the goal percentages, and I don't know if this is a question for which of you, but where's Red Creek fall within those percentages?
So when you look at the different lanes, it looks a little bit different. So for attendance, we're pretty close. And then for behavior, it depends on the building, but pretty close. And then, in academics, we have some work to do, so
Okay.
we just talked about that at our last, month of meetings where we talked about, so, you know, buildings have the behavior in a pretty good place, and we've got kids coming to school, so now all of our energy can get poured into academics.
Okay, great, thank you. And I love the PBIS rewards, where you said you can look in and see who hasn't been recognized, and I love that.
Other questions? Thank you so much, Ivy.
Thank you.
Mr. Bowman?
Great. So our next presentation is from Mr. Carter, who is our assistant principal at the middle and high school level. He is here this evening just to give what we've been kind of referring to as the State of the Union update at the high school. Last board meeting, we had both the elementary school and the middle school kind of give a similar update. So Mr. Carter, as he's getting set up, will have the opportunity to speak regarding the high school.
All right, everybody, first of all, thank you. I, appreciate the time and your commitment and just the ability to come up and talk about the good work that's going on in our high school. So you're gonna see some common threads in our presentations from all three buildings, but there's a very, very good reason for that. We go back to that strategic plan and those focal points, okay? Because essentially our strategic plan is our roadmap, okay? That is the way that we're going to move forward, okay? So focusing on those three bullets there is what encompasses both myself and Mr. Wallace's daily life in some part. That all of our decisions come back to that. So if our strategic plan is our roadmap, our vision is the North Star, is the way that I would definitely say that. That is our guiding light. Everything that we come back to comes back to what we want to create for our kids. And I'll just say as a personal note, as somebody new to the district, it was amazingly refreshing to be so continuously surrounded by people who keep asking the same question. How does this help kids? And that's not a quality of every district. So as somebody who didn't maybe have that before, coming into a situation where so consistently from Matt and Jen straight down, that is an amazing feeling for a brand new administrator, okay? So a little bit on our educational excellence, our quarter one, quarter two honor rolls. I will say respectively, we're still holding similar numbers in quarter three. I did update them since sending this over. We've got 38 on the honor roll. We have 30 on high honor roll and 27 on the principals list. So good numbers there. Always opportunity to grow this list. Opportunities that we always look for. So some of the things that Mr. Waltz and I are always focused on are just a couple of the bullets here. So data-driven practices is part of our vision. That's what drives us. We can't answer the question, what is best for kids, if we don't know where the kids are at, okay? So that's where our diagnostics come into play. I know in Mr. Smiley's presentation, he talked a little bit about iReady and our institution of that program and how it's going to impact kids. We're still running FastBridge and other tools that have been part of our district for quite some time. Me personally, I'm a big fan of surveys. It's a great way to hear from people and get voices from a variety of places. So many of you probably seen many of the surveys that I sent out. I am a big data guy, but I'm also, between myself and Mr. Wallace, we're big on getting people's opinions, okay? Because Red Creek Rising is a group effort. It's not just the two of us, it's not just our team, it's homes, it's families, it's parents. One of the best surveys that I got to hear from this year was our junior and senior survey. That was one of the first ones that I sent out, got input from kids on their experience in the school, and those insights have fueled a lot of both Mr. Wallace and my decisions to take our building forward, okay? Surveys also including the trusted adult survey. That was quite enlightening. I think part of our board update, we included the relationship building superstars, okay? We actually had kids presenting those awards to teachers, and Honestly, I still have goosebumps thinking about all those kids who were really excited about doing that with us, jumping up and down, can I do the next one, can I do the next one? Discipline incidents. This is something that was brought to us by our data coordinator at the beginning of the year, was the tool of using classroom incidents in the high school. So give you a little bit of an insight, classroom incident, something that we started this year as a pre-referral type documentation, where there might have been a little behavior hiccup, okay, in a classroom, where it doesn't rise to the level of, oh my goodness, we gotta call home right away. What I do is I take all of my classroom incidents and I start looking for trends. And then when we see trends, we start intervening. So that goes back to Ms. Bivey's work. Okay, so these have all allowed us in the high school to drop our discipline referrals by approximately 20%. Okay, and that's a big, big jump for the team as a whole. I won't bore you guys with the interventions because they were done as a master class by Ms. Bivey. Tier 1, shout out to Mr. Elmer, doing all that first phase work. Tier 2, this is Rosati. And I want to just mention a little bit about the Learning Hub. This is something that we've just recently fired up. It is I would call a neutral area where students can get support, not only from adults, but we have student tutors as well. So that's something that's going to take some time getting off the ground and build that into our culture of kids getting support, where maybe they just feel more comfortable working with a peer rather than feeling like they have to put themselves out there with a teacher. Obviously, we want both, but we want to give our kids options to succeed. Structures and systems, if I could line up 100 administrators and I ask them what the top 5 things that make a successful school, I hope at least 90 of them say structures and systems. Okay, so as a new admin team, even though Mr. Wallace has been with us before, we're evaluating those every day, you know, and asking that question, how does this help kids? Okay. Some of those changes is instituting senior reviews. Mr. Wallace had them right out the gate. I had them halfway through the year. I'll have a final round of junior reviews before the year ends, making sure that these kids are right where they need to be to walk that stage, to be able to enjoy all that success. So I'll show you a little bit, and you know, just speak personally from the panorama point of view, this thing is amazing. As an administrator, being able to log into this thing and see a bird's eye view, okay, individual students being able to see where they are in content areas, where they are in behavior, where they are in attendance, being able to look at that and then ask yourself again, you know, and I speak this from an administrator point of view, what do I need to do to move those things? And what do I need to do to make sure that we celebrate the positives in there? So with that, I want to share a couple of our pictures here. There's my mug in there. That is our first honor roll celebration of the year. We did pizza there. The second was one of the just most amazing events that we had at the Wayne Cap Pitch competition. And the third is our amazing run as the Science Olympiad. So it's not just reaching academic excellence, it's celebrating it so that we invite more. So culture and communication, looking at that from a student experience point of view. Ms. Bivey talked about a lot of our pushes in PBIS. Okay, we have additional expanded proposals to look for more. The goal here ultimately is for when kids come into this building, they feel connected to it. It's theirs. It needs to be theirs. And we as adults need to do everything we can to make sure that it's theirs. Career readiness, I will say, especially in these last 2 bullets, as a brand new employee, looking at what the high school was already doing, man, we have a lot of stuff that we have. Mr. DeRocher knocking it out of the park with bringing these kids to real life experiences, whether it be FLCC Career Day, he brought them to Oswego State, okay? We are looking at expanding our college offering programs through the grant funding, okay? So there's a lot going on in the high school to boost that. And I'd say in the last part, clubs and activities, and you know, we have a robust offering here. Even with that, we started new clubs this year. We've got Rachel's Challenge started off the year with a great positive message. Bible Study Club ended up popping up this year with a great proposal from one of our kids, okay? had another one. Stitches. We got a knitting club as well too. So there's a lot of things. In the end, kids who feel connected to our school have a better chance of being successful at our school. And part of that experience is that third bullet. So some of my favorite pictures that I picked out, there's our snapshot from the relationship building superstar. Even though that was representation to teachers, it was kids giving them. It was kids recognizing them, okay? That's from our senior bash, 2 of our awesome seniors. And this was also one of my favorites as well. Many of us were invited in as judges to our cake decorating contest. So the kids seeing the adults value their education and coming in and participating. That's what we want for our kids. So I'll leave you guys with the same 3 bullets. Why? Because Red Creek Rising is always rising, okay? It is something that we think about each and every day. And I think one of the things that I'm most proudest of the team that I'm surrounded by is the always question, there's always the question posted, what can we do better? So with that, I'd ask if you have any questions.
Anybody?
Yes, ma'am.
Just expand a little bit more on the junior and senior reviews that you mentioned.
So one of the first things we did is we put out a survey, and I wrote this survey to ask some very specific questions. One of the questions that I ask is, please tell us how we used a linear scale, 1 through 5. How do you feel that blank department prepared you for after school life? Okay. So that data was compilated, and it also had qualitative data in there where it was left open for kids to write specific experiences in the school. I will say, overall, I don't have it right in front of me right now. Overall, it was a positive response survey, okay? Were there absolutely areas as an administrator I was like, oh, I want to look at this, I want to look more, I want to ask questions? Many parts of being an administrator first year is that listening tour, right? Okay, so you start with the most important stakeholders in the building, that's your kids. You get their voice and go, let me take it from here. So it's those pieces, and I will throw in another one. One of the things that I look to do, and I apologize for the corny name, I'm a little corny myself, is I started Carter's Council for the last quarter of the year. The goal there was to give kids who might not feel comfortable going for class president or grade level president an opportunity to come and talk to me and work. We had a great first meeting about positive rewards in the school. So in the end, all of these pieces are to connect our kids and to give them ownership of where this building goes. Yeah. Anybody else?
What was the response percentage for the surveys for the junior and senior reviews?
I had 68% for both, actually coincidentally, both grades. I was kind of a little surprised.
Double check your number,
That number stuck in my head because when I did the percentages, I was like, wait a minute, and then I checked my math. And I think even with that though, I would say, you know, ladies of the board, is that I want that number higher because that gap in responses makes me wonder if they feel like their voice is valued. And so in the spirit of how can we do this better, it's continuously pushing that when you tell me something as a principal, I may not be able to always agree with you. I may not be able to make all these things happen, but I'll always hear you. And I think that's one of the things that I've seen the most success with personally is being there and valuing the things that our kids and staff say to me, and that's a flag Mr. Wallace carries as well.
I love your energy. And also, I'm wondering, so with the Learning Hub and you getting students to come in and tutor, how are you enticing them to come in and spend their free time tutoring other students?
I will say, we did start with some of our amazing kids. Some of them may be in this room right now.
I figured that
from Honor Society, that they, you know, we wanted to get those service time anyway.
Okay.
That is something, Ms. Decker, that I am looking at, okay? Because to me, in a perfect world, for what we saw in this, is that, yeah, there are adults in the room, but it's driven by kids, okay? Like that just, sorry, but like that just gives me excitement for what I hope to see. And this is just a start, and it's gonna take us some time to build these things and have kids be a part of it. And the commitment's there, and the follow-through will be as well from me and the rest of the team.
Well, I mean, I think you look at this community that we live in, and we are all successful because of the people that are around us that support us. So I think that's great that we're instilling that into our high school kids before they go out into the world. So thank you.
Any other questions?
I have a quick question. For the junior and senior surveys, what response surprised you the most?
I would say that given that I was new, nothing really surprised me because I had no basis for it. Part of the reason that the way that I wrote the survey was because I was new. And if I'm going to make decisions as an administrator, I really wanted to look at it in terms of, give me a starting point. Okay, let me hear it. Let me hear all of it. And there was really nothing in there that you wouldn't see in any high school. There's people who really saw some departments as they're amazing. I had so many students who shouted out specific teachers. I'll say, especially in those cases, I took that and I went right to the teacher and I said, I just want to let you know, like 18 students mentioned you by name in that survey. Okay, like, you know, so I'd say all in all, I wasn't surprised by anything.
Other questions?
Can I just add one more thing to that? There is a reason that I wasn't surprised by anything, and that is just my feelings about who we were. And like, not just where we're at, but where we can be. So like what I saw in there was like, yep, okay, now what? What are we gonna do with this?
Other questions? I just wanted to say one thing, with some personal experience with Carter's council. I have to say, I think for maybe some of us sitting up here during high school years to think that you were selected to spend extra time with a principal would have not been on my top 10. For those kids that are not maybe always recognized, I have a student that was absolutely thrilled and elated to be part of a group where their thoughts could be shared. So I just want to thank you. I think it was a great idea. So
Thank you.
kudos. All right, thank you. Okay, we're gonna move on unless you had,
Nope, I'm all good.
okay. We'll move on to the minutes, C1, the meeting minutes of April 10th. Could I have a motion, please, Mrs. Dingman, and a second by Mrs. Allen? I believe there were a couple of corrections that were made. Any other questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, moving on.
I make a motion to approve the whole consent agenda, D 1, 2, 3, 4.
Thank you, Mrs. Dingman. And a second by Mrs. Bliss. Any questions on this group? It's a little light, I'm not upset about that. When you're ready?
Mrs. Foltz?
Yes.
Mrs. Dingman?
Yes.
Mrs. Decker?
Yes.
Mrs. Bliss?
Yes.
Mrs. Allen?
Yes.
And Mrs. Madigan?
Yes. Thank you. All right, moving on to E, new business.
Could I make a motion for E 1, 2, 3, 4?
You can, thank you. And a second? Thank you, Mrs. Allen. Okay, so the first four, which would be the declaration of surplus property, the first and second readings policies listed. Questions on this group? Are you ready?
Mrs. Decker?
Yes.
Mrs. Bliss?
Yes.
Mrs. Dingman?
Yes.
Mrs. Allen? Mrs. Foltz?
Yes.
And Mrs. Madigan?
Yes, thank you. Could I entertain another motion for a chunk or one? Any?
I think we need to spell out E5.
Right,
Yep, so I would,
discussion.
I'll make a motion for E5.
thank you. And a second by Mrs. Bliss. Okay. This up. Any thoughts?
So I guess I'll kind of
Okay.
jump off on this. Our policy committee met last week, and this was one of the policies. This is not a required policy. Through the policy work of some of the things that we have been ongoingly updating, of course, throughout the course of the year. In our most recent batch, there were some recommendations from Erie One, our policy council, to remove certain policies if we had other policies up to date. So one of the policies that the board just voted on for repeal included information that's now possibly in this as an edit and upgrade. So, but the policy committee unanimously felt that this policy, because it dealt with budgetary information, warranted an open discussion before moving forward with one of two things. So really the discussion here this evening would be looking, the policy committee would really be looking for direction on either moving forward with updating and accepting the proposed changes that you would see in this policy, or moving to repeal this policy and remove it as it is not a required policy. It is a current policy of ours, minus any of the edits that you would be looking at on the document in front of you. So we currently have this policy. It doesn't have it doesn't have any of the contingency budget language contained within 5130. Those are both laws. Budget adoption and contingency budget information are both required law information. So that's why it's not a required policy. Our policy, these policies reflect the current laws, so
That's kind of redundant.
it might be, yes.
Was there a consensus from the policy committee?
I don't know if the word is consensus. I stated that because if somebody wants to know anything about the budget, they can go onto the SED site or various others to find out, oh, if we go to contingent, what does that mean? Or what does the budget adoption process look like? It's always current on the SED sites, and they go to Questar. There's other avenues to go as well. So I felt not to have it just because it's something that we would have to keep up with in case if there are any changes.
Okay,
That was my opinion.
thank you.
I think there was generally the same, we all kind of felt the same
Yeah.
way. So yeah, so that's there was a little bit of consensus. We felt like it was just redundant, not needed, but we felt like it warranted an open conversation.
Okay.
So then the other part of that, correct me if I'm wrong, is since we do have policies that are not required, what is that step? But maybe we're talking about that later.
Yeah, Sally will bring that up in our committee updates, yes.
Eat the
So
frosting before the cake.
was the goal of this discussion to necessarily take act on repealing, or were you just looking for discussion?
Let's take action on specifically
Okay.
5130.
Okay,
Right.
and then the committee update would be kind of separate as a general statement?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
For those members that are not on the policy committee, after reviewing this, is there anybody, I'll say personally, I would appreciate the less redundancy that we have, but if there was anybody that's in disagreement with that, I'd be happy to hear that opinion.
I think it'd be nice to, as Nancy mentioned, there's a number of places where people can go and find this information. Maybe in a budget section on our website, we can add links to those websites of if you would like information about how a contingency budget works, you can find it here, or information about the budget process, and give links to SED's website, or Questar's website, where they can find some of this information if they really wanted to dive in
A little
and
more
know.
updated.
As long as it's just a general, because
Yes, a general.
when you have it for 24, 25, it's gonna change just in a few months.
Yes.
And then you have a website that's outdated, you click on it, nobody wants to have a link that says, sorry,
It doesn't work
exist.
anymore,
So,
yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
Maybe if it was just a general then.
yeah. Yeah, with click here and then define current years, maybe just a couple of lines of, but I'm good with getting rid of it. No redundancy.
Okay. Mrs. Decker, could I ask you to change your motion to repeal 5130?
Can
Do
we
we have a
repeal it or do we
motion?
have to do a first read
That-
first?
Do we have a,
Well, she had motion to discuss, so I was just asking if she could change hers after this discussion. We could make a new motion.
motion in a second, so.
We could just adjust the original motion. I don't think that the first and second reading is necessary.
Then I would
For
make a
repeal?
motion to
Yeah.
repeal
We've been using
Yeah,
it.
yeah, to
Okay.
repeal, we do first and second.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we do right. So this would be the first reading then.
Oy.
First reading for repeal.
Never mind,
Well,
Mrs.
Yeah.
Decker.
We've been using the same process to repeal as we've been to add, just to again, give everybody an opportunity to see where we are with
You know
these
what,
things.
I imagine that when Mrs. Kaiser returns from vacation, this will be the first thing that she's looking to do. So we'll give her that opportunity to do that. So we'll table this until the next meeting then. Everybody all right with that? Okay, moving on.
So no motion
So
to
no-
add it to the first read repeal.
Right.
Well,
We can.
We would need
Yeah.
a motion in a second on that.
so we just had the discussion and then the policy committee could add it to the next agenda for
Okay.
repeal. Okay,
Fine.
Fine.
Okay.
second reading, 18th reading, however you'd like to put it. Okay, moving on. Could I have a motion for some other section of new business, please?
I'll do E6.
Alone?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry, E6 and E7.
Okay.
I'll second.
Okay, a motion from Mrs. Bliss for E6 and E7, and a second by Mrs. Foltz. Okay, questions?
Just, please, as soon as I can get there. For E6, just code switches on this?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah, that is correct.
Thank you.
We're within our normal budgetary parameters, just code switches.
Any other questions? When you're ready.
Mrs. Bliss,
Yes.
Mrs. Foltz,
Yes.
Mrs. Decker,
Yes.
Mrs. Dingman,
Yes.
Mrs. Allen,
Yep.
and Mrs. Madigan.
Yes, thank you. Okay, moving on.
Could I get a motion for E8?
Thank you. And a second. Mrs. Foltz? Okay. So before we move on, or before we vote on this or ask any questions, I just want to offer a little bit of clarifying information. So the current policy that's listed on this participation form does not allow for conversation or public comment off of the agenda. So this form is going to be out in the hallway. If it passes for the next meeting, it can be filled out the evening of, if it is an item on the agenda. If not, then the request is for 1 week before. And the idea behind this is not a lack of transparency, but actually to give people the opportunity, one, to speak on the agenda if it's if it's an item for the evening that you're here or coming up. But I know that I always go back to the same example when we were having transportation concerns, that there were several people that maybe didn't come to meetings or didn't voice their concern because they didn't know that others were voicing their concerns. With items like this, being able to add to a future agenda, it might actually give people an opportunity to come in and speak on those same items. The other thing is we rarely act on emergency type things at the board level. So if there's something that's really pressing for someone in the community, the hope is that the chain of command will be followed, and that way that people can get an answer a lot quicker and probably much more efficiently than we can offer at this level. So that being said, this is a working document. So if there are other thoughts or ideas that we could add to this, then I welcome the conversation.
I would just address the comment regarding format. I think that that's a reasonable and probably speaking for the district a little bit here, in terms of the electronic format. And if there's a way to make that more accessible, I think that could be done.
Like a fillable PDF?
Yes, a fillable PVP. Some Kate's gonna love me say this, Google form.
Yeah, I'll love the Google form.
Yeah.
So I will say that I agree with that comment. That necessarily doesn't have to be changed in order to vote on the format here, but I think it's a good thing to keep in mind. Whatever we can do to make it easier for people. Other thoughts, questions?
I think I didn't realize, and I must have missed it when I was reading the policy before when we voted on it, or didn't put two and two together, that it said you could only speak on items on the agenda. I don't necessarily disagree with the concerns that have been brought to us about feeling a little more open and available. I don't want that to be the feel, and to people have, people feel like you can only come and see us and talk to us if you jump through the hoops. I would love for it to be, yes, you have to fill out the form, I agree with that, but not necessarily specifically about items that are on the agenda. But if it's part of the policy, then the only way we can change that at this point is to change the policy.
Yeah.
So I think we should go with what it is, because it falls in line with the current policy. And I do see that we just
voted on it.
Just did that policy, and like I said, I must not have put two and two together, because it is something that I don't love about the form.
I think a good point to make too is that if there are some thoughts or ideas out in the public that the board should really address, we could actually get it on an agenda. So if I go back to the transportation issues, at one point transportation issues were pretty much a constant conversation at the board level, and that could be added to the agenda so that then if other people see it on there on that next meeting, you know that you can come in and you can speak to it because other people share your same concerns. And I was thinking about this earlier, that maybe if it's even kind of a subsection under comments from visitors, so that people could identify what was added to the agenda by a district member or a student or whoever, so that you knew that obviously there was going to be more discussion than maybe what we do over surplus property of chairs or something like that.
Does it state in the policy that it has to be the 1 week? Or is that just something that we've set?
I have that in front of me.
I mean, I
I
would,
provided at your desks or maybe in your copy of the current policy, not the one that was just recently approved. On the, I guess I'll say the second type page under public comment.
The thing with having it the week before is that then it's being able to be added to the agenda.
I think, well, and we say 1 week, it's not like we said 7 business days. So if you did 1 week, if it comes out on Friday, then that would, before the next meeting, it would actually just be 2 days before the agenda came out. So probably the idea was just enough time to get it on there and have time for people to notice that it's there. If you wanted to
But that
speak.
doesn't give you, so as the board president, you should be sitting with the superintendent to develop the agenda. So how does that give you time?
So that would be typically, we talk on Wednesday, so they would be submitted on Wednesday for the
Yeah.
following, yeah.
Yeah.
Talk last meeting about if someone fills out this form prior to a meeting and not submitting it a week ahead, what does that look like?
So that was, Mr. Curtis, I'm gonna pick on you a little bit if you don't mind, but Mr. Curtis was speaking on behalf of something on the agenda. So the thought process would be that this sheet would be out there and that he could fill it out, and he marked that he wanted to speak. He would turn in this paper, or Amanda would take it from him, and then we would understand what he was speaking on. So it would still give the opportunity to speak on agenda items, and then let's just say that that wasn't on there tonight and he filled out the sheet, we would add that item under comments
Yeah.
from visitors, and that would give him an opportunity to speak then, and again, make the public aware that it's a, you know, a district subject. And so people could also come in and speak to that same item by just filling out the sheet, because now it's on the agenda, if that makes sense.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, looking at the policy, maybe I'm missing it, but I don't actually see where it says 7 days for public comment.
It
It
doesn't.
does not identify it.
It was
The 7 days really comes down to the adoption, or the process of putting together the board agenda overall. So, you know, we have certain timelines that the board clerk, the board president, and myself work through to lock that agenda in before it goes live, you know, typically on Friday afternoons, you know, preceding a board agenda week. But as the president indicated, her and I sit on Wednesday of that week prior, so 1 week prior to the agenda, or 2 days prior to the agenda coming out, to really review any of those requests or any of the other items as the agenda started to build. So that 7 days organically would give us an opportunity to have that information in our hands as we're setting the agenda.
I'm just curious what the board thought is, like, I understand that the agenda comes out on Friday. I know a week ahead of time sometimes can feel unrealistic for people who are maybe wishing to address the board. Should we not maybe change that to, let's say, 3, like it has to be by Monday, and then the item could be added to the agenda under a separate section? I'm just wondering what the other board members' thoughts are on that. Instead of being a week, still be in advance, not the night of, but being, 3 days, that, like, is 3 days more realistic?
I don't think that that's off the table. I think when we originally talked about the 1 week, it was because we were trying, as a board, had thought that late additions were something that we were trying to stay away from. I don't know if that necessarily falls into this category. This might be a separate situation, and it wouldn't be a problem. But I think we've tried to make that agenda that comes out on Friday as close as possible. So I don't think it's impossible. I'm just gonna say, I don't think it would take as much review or anything. But that's, I just wanna give why we started with that 7 days.
I don't know if that would be like a compromised happy medium too.
I think keeping in mind too that we've had not very many people who have filled it out to want to come in and talk in the last year or so. I think it doesn't sound like it would be an overwhelming amount of stuff. It might be one.
We haven't really had a lot of people come and talk, right?
That's what I'm saying. So it may be like one every couple months that we would have to review.
I'm fine with that. I like the Monday before idea, if that works for the timeline for the president and the superintendent.
In the thinking that the amount of times it'd have to be started as a late item would be minimal, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Maybe it's even like noon on Monday or something. I don't know if that's getting too specific. I don't know.
I mean, I think that would be fine as long as we were making sure that we were checking it. You know what I mean? So that everybody was up to date on what was being added.
And
the
if we
highlighted,
find
yes.
that it gets to be too cumbersome, we could always
Could
switch
make an
it back.
adjustment, yeah.
Because it's not in the policy, so it is something that
Right.
we can.
We have local
Yeah.
decision on.
Yeah.
Other thoughts on it?
I'm gonna say one thing.
Oh, yeah.
Do we wanna say, I know we were gonna not do 2 business days, do we wanna consider 2 business days in case it's a week that we have a Monday off? Just for your guys' sanity?
I'm not against that.
I don't know, I'm just throwing it out there that.
Matt works on Sundays, so it doesn't bother him.
That's not a business day, though.
For who?
True.
I think that would be fine too.
Yeah.
Okay.
2 business days.
Leading to the meeting.
Yeah, Mrs.
You
Osborne,
wanna
what?
say 2 full, because are we counting Wednesday? Like,
Right,
before
two.
meeting day?
Here we go.
Right, right, I mean, 'cause if you say two business days, if they count all of Wednesday as a business day.
Okay,
then
why
it-
don't we
Two,
say
two
Monday?
business days prior to the board meeting date.
Yes.
Right.
Mrs. Osborne, could you remind me who made the motion, please?
Damon
It
Foltz.
was Dingman and Foltz.
Mrs.
And
Dingman.
I would love to change my motion.
Thank
to
you.
The updated form
For the
language.
1 week piece.
Mhm.
Okay.
To
Okay.
2 business days
Prior
prior
to
to
the
the board
meeting.
meeting.
I feel like I'm gonna see this again, but any other questions? Ideas before we move forward?
And adding it online as a form,
Yeah, that's gonna be whatever.
right.
Yes.
The understanding that that'll
Yes,
I
take.
think
Yeah.
that's absolutely, we need to
Yep.
move into 2024
What's
with
that motion? That's
2024.
the move forward motion.
Yes.
When you're ready.
Mrs. Allen,
Yes.
Mrs. Bliss,
Yes.
Mrs. Decker,
Yes.
Mrs. Dingman,
Yes.
Mrs. Foltz,
Yes.
and Mrs. Madigan.
Yes. Thank you. Okay. Could I have a motion for yet another section of E, new
I'll make
business?
a
please?
motion for E, 9, 10, 11, 12. If there's a 13, I'm gonna say it too, but I gotta scroll.
Yeah, there is.
Oh, 14, 15.
No,
Nope, sorry.
You mean
I'll
Up
just
to
stop.
13?
Up to 13.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Dingman. In a second, please.
Yes.
Thank you, Mrs. Bliss. So this would be E9 through 13, the FMLA requests, overnight field trip and the district treasurer. Everybody on the same page? Good, kinda. Any questions about this group?
Just want to say congratulations to Envirothon.
Yeah.
Yeah, another great opportunity for some of our students,
Super proud.
one of which,
Is in the room?
2 of which, one, at least one.
Who's on Envirothon? Congratulations.
Congrats.
Good luck. Anything else? Okay, when you're ready.
Mrs. Foltz,
Yes.
Mrs. Dingman,
Yes?
Mrs. Decker,
Yes.
Mrs. Bliss,
Yes.
Mrs. Allen,
Yes.
and Mrs. Madigan.
Yes, thank you. Okay, I would take a motion for E15, the BOCES report and budget vote, Mrs. Bliss, and a second by Mrs. Dingman. Everybody have a chance to take a look at this,
Mhm. Yes?
okay? So relatively typical, we have 3 candidates for the
3 for 3.
spots. So if I remember correctly, we're gonna need to vote individually for each spot.
Yes, please.
So I would take, a motion from someone to name for the first spot. Can you tell me what you're motioning? If you wanted to pick one of those lovely people.
One moment.
Lynn Gay, maybe?
Yep.
How about Pendleton?
Okay, so a motion's on the floor by Mrs. Allen, Ms. Pendleton for the first candidate vote. Can I have a second, please? Mrs. Decker? Any questions? I'm gonna move right through these if you guys don't mind. When you're ready.
Mrs. Decker,
Yes.
Mrs. Bliss,
Yes.
Mrs. Dingman,
Yes?
Mrs. Allen,
Yes.
Mrs. Foltz,
Yes.
and Mrs. Madigan.
Yes. Thank you.
I'll make a motion for Lynn Gay.
Thank you. And a second? Mrs.
Second.
Bliss, Mrs. Bliss, I'm sorry, I saw first. Any questions? When you're ready.
Mrs. Foltz,
Yes.
Mrs. Allen,
Yes.
Mrs. Dingman,
Yes.
Mrs. Bliss,
Yes.
Mrs. Decker,
Yes.
and Mrs. Madigan.
Thank you, yes, thank you. I said that backwards. Okay, and last but not least,
I'll make a motion for OJ Seller.
Sounds
I'll
right.
take it. And a second by Mrs. Foltz. I don't know how the two of you were talking at the same time the whole night, but any questions?
We're on the same page.
Okay, when you're ready.
Mrs. Bliss,
Yes.
Mrs. Foltz,
Yes.
Mrs. Decker,
Yes.
Mrs. Dingman,
Yes?
Mrs. Allen,
Yes.
and Mrs. Madigan.
Yes, thank you. Okay, last one is the administrative budget vote. Could I have a motion, please? Accept. Mrs. Decker, in a second.
I was giving it to you.
Mrs. Folds. Questions?
Just a comment.
Yes.
I am extremely disappointed in the Wayne Finger Lakes BOCES administrative team regarding their PR service, regarding the communication for the treasurer piece. And, you know, I guess I have a higher standard than they do. And just want to express my displeasure with them. But
Appreciate
I
your comment.
certainly support the children.
Thank you. Any other comments? When you're ready.
Okay. Mrs. Bliss,
Yes.
Mrs. Folds,
Yes.
Mrs. Decker,
Yes.
Mrs. Dingman,
No.
Mrs. Allen,
Yes.
and Mrs. Madigan.
Yes. Thank you. Okay, E14, I would take a motion for the superintendent contract extension. Mrs. Dingman, second by Mrs. Allen. I think this has been a conversation at this point, so I think, are we all ready to vote? When you're ready.
Mrs. Folds,
Yes.
Mrs. Bliss,
Yes.
Mrs. Dingman,
Yes?
Mrs. Allen,
Yes.
Mrs. Decker,
I'm going to abstain.
Abstain.
and Mrs. Madigan.
Yes. Congratulations, Mr. Van Orn. We have an oath to take.
Thank you very much.
Amanda, whenever you're ready. It's the most up-to-date book we have right there.
There's a lot of history in that book.
At the end.
It is. It starts quite a while ago.
You're gonna want to mail that to Dave Scholes, I think, when can make his own copy.
Yeah.
For the record, it started in 1956.
Oh my.
It's gonna go
Bless
to
you.
the historical society afterwards.
Yes.
Good point.
So you're gonna have to repeat after me.
Do I have to
Yeah,
raise?
stand
Do I have to stand up?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, you make us stand up, so.
I, Matthew S. Van Orman,
I, Matthew S. Van Orman,
do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of New York,
and the Constitution of the State of New York,
and that I will faithfully discharge the duties of Superintendent of Schools
and that I will faithfully discharge the duties of Superintendent of Schools
according to my best ability.
according to my best ability.
Congratulations.
I'll have you sign your name here. It's still in the history of the book.
Thank you, Amanda.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it's an honor to continue to serve the Red Creek District, and thank you to the Board of Education for their renewed faith in that leadership. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
For that honor, you get to do the next part of the agenda.
Wonderful. I just wanted to share, obviously, we have our upcoming budget vote, May 21st. One of those items is our board member election. So board petitions were due on Monday of this week, April 22nd at 5 p.m. After that, our board clerk did a random drawing on Tuesday morning. We have 3 open positions this year on our board. We had 7 petitions submitted. So I just wanted to share publicly the order in which those were drawn, and they will show up on our board budget ballot in the following order. So I just, it doesn't take any action, it was just really to make sure that it was out there in the public and everybody had an opportunity to see what, who had submitted and what the order was for the upcoming election.
Thank you. Is there anything else? for you?
Sure, I just wanted to do a quick update. Obviously, yesterday and today, we started our state assessments in grades 3 through 8. We conducted ELA assessments, English Language Arts assessments yesterday and today. Of course, we're using the computer-based testing model, which we've done for the last couple of years. Overall, excuse me, attendance was very good. Between middle and elementary school, grades 3 through 8, we have under 25 students who are absent for any part of those days, which will then have to, of course, make up whatever they missed, whichever portion of those tests. We also had, right around that same number, 25 or so, test refusals between elementary and middle school 3 through 8, which is, I think, holistically down a little bit historically compared to what we've been. Those get reported grade by grade level, so each individual grade and the building, the state's looking for 95% participation on those things. So between the attendance, the ones that were absent and the test refusals, the attendance ones will be made up. The whole format is slightly different this year. Normally, we'd have like a week somewhere that we would conduct our ELA assessments, and then a different week for math with a couple days in there afterwards for makeups. The way the state set it up this year is we have 6 straight weeks, and school districts had the ability to select within those 6 weeks how and when they would administer those assessments under certain parameters. So we couldn't do ELA day 1 and then the next day with the same kid do math day 1. We have to complete one assessment prior. And back in the fold this year at the elementary level, now in grade 5 is our science state assessment, which we did not have last year. Historically, that was grade 4, but we had no science assessment last year in elementary. And both the science assessments at grade 5 and grade 8 are also on the computer this year. So, in speaking with the principals, it looked like, I'll say 40 to 90 minutes was kind of the average in terms of what the students generally took this year to complete each of those 2 days separately. Day 2 for ELA is typically a little bit longer because it's the writing pieces. Of course, this year it's typing, as my son informed me this morning. It's not writing, Dad, it's typing. But those are typically take a little longer just because of the extended response time. But seems like we're off and running in a good spot with those. So
Great. Thank you. For this, this is the first meeting that we've added board committee updates. And I know that we've had some discussion about kind of what that looks like. So we're just gonna go through the list of committees that would kind of pertain to. If there's nothing to update the board on, we can just simply pass. But we're gonna add this from now on just because it might give us an opportunity to fill in the rest of the board kind of where these groups are. So we're gonna start with policy. Mrs. Allen?
Sure. The policy committee was thrilled to roll up our sleeves in August and get started. So we've met approximately 9 times since August. And the focus was to get caught up on policies that had updated over the past few years. We actually just finished that point last week, so that was a really good feeling to get to that point. But we also purposely focused on policies that were required by Erie 1. So the next step is to look at what policies are required, but we're looking for feedback and what is the will of the board as to how we proceed with what we prefer to do next. So some of the options are look at those required by law, review in numeric order, right? So start at the zeros and work our way down numerically, or establish an overall review process. So I think what we're looking is for this committee going forward for this year, but then also in subsequent years, what does that look like to get that process established for every year?
Okay. Questions for Mrs. Allen?
Can you say those 3 options again?
Sure. look at those that are required by law, review in numeric order. And I just wanna maybe give a asterisk to that option, that I think it's been several years since it's been reviewed in order perhaps, so that was a little bit palatable to the current policy committee. And then also establish an overall review process, so like, you know, as a whole, what would that look like? So what is the charge going forward, to establish the policy committees?
Is your plan to meet again this year? Or are you looking for a plan as of July 1?
I think, I guess my opinion, I don't wanna speak on behalf of everyone else, but I think my opinion is such that if there are some more things that we can accomplish between now and July 1, we would like to do that, because we've been making some really good progress.
I agree.
But then we're also cognizant of the fact that it's the end of April and we have, 2 months left as a current policy committee.
So this isn't on your list, but just my thought is I have served, fortunately, just a small time on the policy committee when I've been on the board, but
You can remove the word fortune.
yeah, it's just a lot of work. I always thought that it would be beneficial to maybe have some sort of calendar to work through, even if that was a 3-year calendar, so that if you did pick your asterisk option, maybe what it looked like, because I also think that maybe it would help manage the amount that you had to get through, or whoever's on that committee at the time. And then also if, for potentially new people that might want to be part of that committee next year, they could kind of understand, okay, so this first quarter, if you did do, a full review, we're taking on, the first 25 policies or something like that.
So
But just a
can I
thought.
also throw in another little layer to it, and Mr. Mayor, correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that once we go through and catch up on all of the policy updates, as long as we stay on top of updates as they come in, there shouldn't be a bulk, like, it shouldn't be a rotation where every 3 years we have to go through and look at all the policies, because they should stay up to date once we get them up to date, as long as we stay on top of it.
As long as they're policies that they support.
Right.
Because remember, we have that other
Yes.
part of, are we gonna keep policies that they don't support, they're not relevant?
Which I think we were gonna bring for the will of the board.
Right, that's what this,
If people
Yes.
wanted us to keep them, or just put them on as, retiring them as we find them.
A question regarding the required by law, is there concern that we have policies that are required, or we don't have policies that are required by law, we don't know?
Just the opposite, I would say, so that we have more policies
Right.
that are not required. So in an effort to determine whether or not that's necessary and to reduce the number of policies that we have.
What would that look like if we were to say, okay, let's look at what's required by law, what would the policy committee, like, how would you move forward with that direction?
Right, with Erie One, with a comparison of what Erie One is advising that we have as policy.
I think she means, like, how would you recognize what should be eliminated? Is it strictly by law?
Well, I guess I'm trying to differentiate between what you just said. Well, what you said at the beginning was we've gotten through everything that was required by Erie One. And now,
updated only.
okay, so
So there were-
updates from Erie One that we hadn't
Correct.
put
There
into
might have been
place.
5 years worth of updates that didn't take place.
Yep.
But we
Okay,
did also make sure that we have all the required policies too in our
okay.
That's what we
list.
just did this past.
So
Right,
really
yes,
what
that's
you
I'm
would
saying.
do
So
is-
we do have all of the required policies that we have to have,
Okay. So the
right?
required by law would be, you're gonna look at what Erie One says is required by law, identify any that we have that are outside of that scope, and then bring those to the board and say, hey, do we want to keep these, continue these, update these, yada yada. Am I understanding
That's
that
the-
correctly?
That's the question being asked of.
Okay.
Right.
What do you
That's
think
what
that,
What
would
is
look
the
like.
will?
what do you think that number looks like?
A lot.
40 plus.
I
40.
think more than 40 probably.
There's about 40 required policies. The rest of our policies are maybe recommended or not required, or maybe duplicates from the law.
Do you feel that there's a lot of redundancy?
No, not redundancy, but there were ones that we repealed in the past couple of meetings that we felt confident that we could just put on the agenda for repeal without necessarily having it be like the musical instruments or, whatever, I can't think off the top of my head.
Do we feel like the extra policies are micromanaging to any level?
It depends
You just
on
never
the
know
policy.
what happened, why that policy came into place
Right.
at that time. Did somebody have something happen and just say, all right, we'll just create a policy
Right.
and then we're gonna throw it in the book?
I mean, I wouldn't be against going that route.
Yeah.
Maybe
Same.
only because if I'm not against a full review, but if you were to remove the ones that we don't need, your full review
Short.
doesn't have to be quite as long.
That's right.
But that's just my thought.
So I think that's something that Erie One would get involved with to say,
This is,
right, out of
Yeah.
all of your policies, they'd give us a list to
Yeah.
say.
I think in consultation with our council,
yeah.
right,
Oh,
to,
yeah.
to also ensure that we haven't opened ourselves up to some sort of a litigation possibility
Right.
because of removing something that may have legal ramifications as well.
Agree. My thought, I think where I would land would be, and again, the logistics of what that looks like with the seats you guys sit in with it, is we would do the bylaw, and once we get through that, we, whoever we is, because this could take years, then go through it in numerical order, again, with the updates from Erie One, and then you really have a clean set of policies. And from there, you've touched everything, looked at everything, they're good policies, they're current policies, and then going forward, it would just be the updates.
Right.
But I think the priority would be the required bylaw.
Yep.
I can get behind that too. That's,
Yeah, it's good. It's good information.
Thank you.
I
Yeah,
like that
absolutely.
you're giving us some years, so.
yeah.
It's a little harsh.
I know the reality.
Okay. Thank you, Mrs. Allen. Mrs. Decker, anything for transportation? Thank you. Mrs. Folds, anything on BOCES? Mrs. Allen, we're back to you for community center.
Okay. The Community Center Advisory Board consists of 7 members, 7 core members that are from the governing bodies of, like the town of Butler, the town of Sterling, and so on. And then there are 2 members at large, for a total of 9 total members on that advisory board. So I wasn't gonna take the time to go through the governing bodies, but I guess I will because I missed a piece. So the town of Butler, the town of Sterling, the town of Victory, town of Wolcott, Village of Fairhaven, Village of Red Creek, and Board of Education. So those are the 7 members that make up the core, and then 2 members at large. So recently, the advisory board restructured the flow of its meetings and established a process that includes an agenda, minutes, a sign-in sheet for visitors, and so on. So that was really great to see that, right? So there's a little bit more structure that follows sort of the Board of Education meetings as well. The meeting agendas include a director's report from Mr. Welcher and discussion regarding programming and facilities at the community center, as well as new business, old business presentations, again, kind of the same flow or format as our board agendas. In December, Danielle was a guest and presented the advisory board with financials for the community center, including some feedback from a recent audit, which sparked some conversation amongst the advisory board on with regard to the financials. The advisory board began to discuss possible sources of generating revenue, and the advisory board invited Jay Roskup, the community schools director, to the March meeting to discuss grants and some preliminary information. despite some misconceptions of the community centers closing, or as any kind of financial burden, the Board of Education and the Advisory Board will work together as needed to review what options there are to stabilize the budget. And it's in the best interest for both the district and the community center as we continue to work in tandem moving forward and growing and promoting the community center. So those were
Thank you.
the things that I had noted for an update.
Perfect. Question?
Could I ask, so you had said that due to the recent audit, there was some concern with the community center. But just as a clarification, the concerns that were brought up has not been anything to do with this current administration or even the immediate past administration. I believe that the issues that have taken place have been, between 20, 25 years worth of expenditures that have taken place without revenue.
Correct.
Okay.
Did they, we said that it had sparked some concerns and then they had some conversations about what could generate additional revenue. What kinds of ideas did they have?
I would say that that's in the very preliminary stages of discussion. There were some ideas of some fundraising and some rebranding of the community center, maybe some new apparel and some like a new logo, just some different things, an open house. If I'm forgetting anything, Mr. Welcher, please feel free to jump in. Just some preliminary ideas of brainstorming of what could be done to promote the community center to the community in a new way, in a new refreshing way, maybe that just hasn't happened before.
Okay, thank you.
So the community center is the focal point of community engagement. We know, just as residents here, that it serves as a vital hub for individuals of all ages within the community. We need to provide a space for recreation, education, social interaction. So I look at this as it's an in-kind gesture to have the community center. So while it's not breaking even just by the folks coming in, it is being supported by the general fund. And, our kids use it for PE, for, other items, for, their after-school activities, the community, the 21st century. So I don't think it should bear the folks that pay for memberships to have it be their sole responsibility, or to even have fundraising and trying to sell some swag to make it whole. We have a responsibility to the community to have this take place.
I would agree with that. So the advisory board is not taking the position that it's their responsibility or burden to bridge that gap or to
Try to
figure
fix
out-
it?
Right,
Okay.
exactly, yep.
Okay, good.
Other questions for him? Okay. Mrs. Dingman, anything for finance?
I don't. I still have my notes from what the plans were for this year, but then we pushed pause. But I can't wait to discuss things with Danielle maybe in the future.
Get your calendar out, Danielle. Okay, for rural schools, I would say, I'm happy that Jolene and I are actually getting correspondence again from rural schools because we hadn't.
They're very good.
Yeah,
Oh,
so
I get them all the time from the website,
apparently
from them.
you're liked better than we are because it's, this year has been a lot better. Unfortunately, sometimes the opportunities to attend some of these events make it a little bit difficult, but I know for a while we weren't super involved, but I think I speak for Jolene when I say that it's nice to at least see what's going on and getting some information from them. So, as far as NISBA, there's not really anything to report other than the fact that we obviously have some end of the year stuff coming up that We use them for a resource, but I don't have anything major to report on them, so. That's gonna be it for board committees. We'll do this again at the next meeting, in case there's anything to update the rest of the group. That's it, so, I will take a motion to move into executive for a negotiations matter. Mrs. Foltz, and a second. Mrs. Bliss, thank you for coming. Mr. Carter will